So that has been my first.
Counselors over there is. Not a full
Sorry,
start.
that's optimal that it'll work. Is it all right?
Yeah, no.
We are ready to. We're ready to start, so welcome. And we need to roll call, please.
Yeah, Councilor Ford,
Here.
Councilor Morton,
Here.
Councilor Willis.
Here.
Mayor Schwartz.
Here.
Councilor Waller is excused, and then Councilor Rowley here, and Councilor Schwartz.
Here.
All right, I think at this point, we're gonna hand it over to you for.
Yeah, so okay, so what we're gonna do here is just sort of debrief about the walk just a bit. Since that was more of a chance to sort of see the community and all that sort of stuff, so here's a chance to sort of discuss anything that we saw. Also, I'll pass out this just and I should hand it both ways, so that goes quicker. Here's a diagram that we created to sort of give you a picture of that last bit of neighborhood that we saw. And as that's going around, I'll sort of ask you a couple of questions just to seed the conversation. So first of all, was there anything that surprised anybody walking around out there? Anything that surprised?
The number of ADUs in that short area that we saw.
Number of ADUs.
Because we have, and you kind of mentioned on the walk, we've sort of presented that as a new concept.
Right.
Yeah.
In recent years,
Yeah.
like they never existed before.
Right.
I think they just used to call them mother-in-law.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Anything else that surprised anybody?
I'd say, I think the number of under 5,000 square foot lots, right, just the nature of splitting those lots into two, but. It doesn't, to me, it doesn't seem out of the norm.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's good. Yeah, and planning commission, feel free to chime in if you got anything.
Well, I also think it's interesting that you have houses that are. You know. Separated by about 120 years in some places. Of development, but they look like they fit really well for them, which I think is interesting. You know, you have a house built in 2023, which is probably an EDU next to. Any corner to a house built in 1890, can't really tell it.
Yes, and I mean, that's an interesting take. It's actually something that we talked about at the historic preservation meeting last night, just a little bit. Because when we look at that Henry Hill plat, if I have it in here again, I had it. Anyway, what you remember that picture of the Henry Hill plat, those are all exactly the same lots. Now, what happened in the past was not like subdivisions of nowadays where you see people go in and do every lot, then keep on going in every lot, and it's a one time period of neighborhood, right? What you see out there is a neighborhood, especially in the historic parts of town, that has been, this was a house here in 1880. Here's one in 1920. Here's one that's a ranch style, you know, from 1950 or 1960. And so, especially in this part of town, you see that gradual accumulation of houses. Yeah, it's exactly right. And yeah, you can see it in that diagram as well. Anything else that anybody learned or anything like that going on?
I'd like to say, it seems like that, the mixture of sizes and all, even the fourplexes that we saw, didn't, destroy the fabric of the neighborhood or seem way out of place. It wasn't like an 8-story building. In a trailer park, but it was. It looked like a neighborhood that developed over time.
Yeah, I think that it's true that things like fourplexes in a lot of instances look very complementary to like a single family style home. And it's interesting, we did that in a couple of neighborhoods, right? I could literally take you out to every single neighborhood in this community and do the exact same thing. Well, no, even the newer ones have some of it, so like places that surprise me, like up off of Picture. Even off of Picture, which is like a very 70s era subdivision, there's still duplexes, there's still things like quadplexes or 5 units on a lot. In that subdivision, and it surprises me. Also, I took the planning commission a few years back. I know that the mayor was on that trip, and maybe Corby, maybe you were on it. We went around the pool. And when we went around the pool, I pointed out all the various apartment buildings that are down in that area as well. So really, truly, that this stuff is, there is a mix of housing well integrated in almost every neighborhood in the community. Yes,
Because the house we looked at on 13th Street, I walked by it before many times and didn't realize, I think it's 13th Street where they have the duplex and then in their backyard of the main house. It'd be interesting to see what the backyard looks like in that place, because it does. I like green spaces for houses. I think that's why we have the code set the way we have it. I think that's interesting, but even in my neighborhood, in the historic neighborhood, just a recent remodel. Like just finished 2 weeks ago, is a triplex. Right in the historic neighborhood. It surprised me that was even allowed.
yes, it's true. Now, let me ask you another question. Were there characteristics that you felt made a building better fit in with the neighborhood? What do you think? Were there?
Upkeep.
Upkeep? Yeah, okay.
There's
That's-
some creative wiring.
Yeah, upkeep, yeah, unfortunately, I mean, yeah, so that's probably true of both single family homes and. Things with more than one unit in it.
Sidewalks for sure, you know, that helps them blend in better.
Sidewalks, yeah, so, okay, infrastructure. Look like that, that's good. Any other thing that,
Unless it's a road with no sidewalks.
yep, so what do you think, what were other characteristics that made a house or a building fit in better with the neighborhood? Anything?
Mature landscaping, big trees.
Big trees help, definitely, I mean, big trees help urban development everywhere.
Yeah.
And maintaining some of the classical, like the decorative pieces on different kinds of architecture, maintaining some of those, even though it's been remodeled.
Yeah,
I think one of the things that allowed those multifamily units to not be as noticeable is parking. They weren't relying on street parking, so it's not this feel of, high residential or high use units right next to single family homes, because the streets were open and there wasn't a bunch of parking on the road.
yeah, so the fact that the parking could be accommodated on site was, What?
It way less noticeable.
yeah,
And I didn't realize that we had parking issues with the manufactured home park
yeah,
until today. I didn't realize that was a big issue.
so interesting thing, wasn't it? Now what, and I mean, I think that we've sort of gotten to it perhaps via the other end, sort of the negative of that question, what makes buildings not fit in with the neighborhood, would you say? Any thoughts?
Well, I think here does a pretty good job compared to other places I've lived, but. One of the things that Salem's having a huge issue with is you have infill into single family units that is so high that they can see into backyards in a way that. Becomes really problematic for those homeowners.
Yeah.
And here it feels like they're just low enough where that's less of an issue. So I think that's something to be mindful of.
That's an issue in my neighborhood. Duplexes behind me where there's oversight into my backyard. Well, lately I'm quite a lot of my pajamas, so.
I mean, I feel like it's one thing if the duplexes were there first or the single, or
Yeah.
the family there first, but what we hear or see in communities now is infill of multifamily going into single. So I think that's something that we really need to be mindful of when infill is being considered.
Yeah.
Is making sure that it's consistent with the characteristic of the neighborhood and that the property owners that are around the infill.
See, but-
That is the best of our ability.
Yeah, Patrick's point, if the duplexes behind me had gone in with some trees.
Yeah.
Obviously, they wouldn't be mature at this point when they go in, but if there was trees, I mean. All the homeowners on all sides started planting trees, but had there been some regard for that. I think it would. Be better accepted. I mean, we'll get there in the end because we're growing trees, but
Yeah.
I think people have to think about that when they're putting any kind of development into an established neighborhood.
Yeah, that's, okay, yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And one thing that, to what Councilor Source was saying is, I do think scale is absolutely an important thing to be considering, and on that time that we were out there, we did not see anything over 2 stories. Right, we saw lots of fourplexes, all that sort of stuff, those are 2-story units, right? And so, and even a number, the duplexes that we saw on the same lot, those were single-story duplexes, and so the scale is not just creating issues through that.
The other thing I think again, and I know the state's gonna have issues, but it's parking. You
Yeah.
know, we have infill in our neighborhood and I was super worried about the parking, but it worked out because all of the infill came with. Like driveways that have enough space for the vehicles, but when you're not requiring minimum parking. Then you're using the street as your parking lot, and that creates all sorts of other challenges, changes characteristics of streets, especially with how kids play, how neighbors use the space, and it just becomes an issue.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, all right. So I think that's all very good. So let me just explain this diagram, and then what we'll do is I'll introduce our consultants to help us with this project. This is Matt and Emma Quinn, but I'll go through this real quick and then I'll introduce them. They can go through the project. So this diagram shows us where the little alley that we walked through, and just sort of trying to picture how the lots got shifted over time, but then also things like ADUs, the duplex, and all that sort of stuff. And it's exactly Councilor Source hit the nail on the head. The amazing thing is, this is not a new idea. We're like, we, in our housing production strategy, one of the things we identified was create standards to figure out how to do infill development in a more comprehensible way, a more cohesive way than we're currently doing it. And we really do think that fundamentally, to do that, we can look at how we've grown in the past as inspiration for our future. And so looking at things like this and seeing, wow, look at that. They put over time a house and then essentially an ADU behind it, making it a duplex, and they split off a lot behind it. Isn't that an interesting thing that they did that in the past? Because we could do some similar things, right? Imagine if somebody had a 9,800 square foot lot. They had a house at the front, say they have a kid, they want to create equity for that kid. Rather than just creating an ADU in the back, they could potentially, using some of these things as precedents, they could say, what if we actually split off the lot at the back of our lot and we were able to give it to our kid? Then we're like giving our kid equity through that process. Right now, we would not allow that. We wouldn't allow a land division that small. But potentially we could. I mean, we have the precedent elsewhere currently in the city. So that's really what this is trying to show. And then indeed, going even further down to E and between 4th and 5th, you'll see that there's just half-size lots over over there, and really you can go in a number of these areas and see that that 9,800 square foot lot got split in half in a number of places. And perhaps that's a model that we could embrace and use elsewhere, but we want to know how we should do that. Really, that's part of the questions that we're asking as part of this project. So with that, our consultants for the project are Matt and Emma Quinn. They prepared some boards. They're gonna explain where we're going with the project and all that sort of stuff. Go for it, Matt.
All right, thanks. And I'm gonna stand up here. I don't think I'm gonna hold this microphone, but if you can't hear me, then I will. So if that sounds okay, then I'll stand sort of to the side of these boards so I don't block the board, even though they're probably impossible to read for folks back there. But I'll kind of do a quick, I come up here and look at them, and they'll get put up on your website as well, so that people can see them. And I think the plan is to just have them in City Hall so people can come in and look at them and see them as well. So again, my name's Matt Hasty. I work for a company called MIG, as does M Quinn, or EQ, if you like. That's what I call her. And so I've been working on, I was telling EQ on the way here, I've been working on projects in Independence for quite a while. I worked on an earlier edition of your Parks and Open Space Plan. I'm working on the current edition. I worked on your Transportation System Plan. So that's just to say I've been coming to Independence for a long time. I actually came here, this is a weird little anecdote, but I came here for my first anniversary about 4 years ago, which my wife was like, Independence for our anniversary? I'm like, yes, it's a fun place. Like, yeah, so we did that. We stayed at the hotel, which I had never stayed at before. But I was like, yeah, we had a great time. So anyway, that's just to say I have a certain amount of history working on projects in Independence. So this project is to take a look at your development code, and as Fred's been talking about, look at it in terms of, are there ways to allow for kind of a wider range of types of houses, or houses on a wider range of lot sizes to be built in Independence in the future. And as Fred said, kind of continue some of the patterns that you already see that happened a long time ago, but are maybe not allowed by your development code now. So this project being funded in part by a grant, or in most part by a grant from the state. And so one of the state's kind of primary objectives is, and it's a state law or rule, is to make sure that cities have standards for all housing that are quote unquote clear and objective. So they're straightforward, people can understand them, staff can apply them. They don't require discretion, really. They're easy for somebody to come in and say, oh yeah, I see what that means. There's not a lot of room for interpretation. So that's the state rule. So that is another thing that we are doing, is just taking a look at your code and making sure that as we're identifying changes to your code, we're making sure that those standards are going to be clear and objective. So they're easier for staff to administer, for applicants to understand, and for you all as decision makers to also understand and review those decisions. So that's kind of a general overview of what we're trying to do in terms of the objectives. The other thing I would say, I guess two other things, Fred alluded to it or talked about it, was as we're doing this, identify standards that are important in terms of ensuring that new housing does fit, or at least isn't, kind of incompatible or jarring with the surrounding neighborhood. So that's an important thing. And then somebody else talked about sidewalks as being important. That's one way to kind of create more cohesive pattern within a neighborhood. So we do want to make sure we look at your requirements for public facilities to serve housing, and that they are consistent and applied fairly. So that's another objective. So the schedule we have, it's about a year-long project. And we've got kind of these 5 phases here. The first phase was just kicking off the project, meeting with Fred, Sean, and Emmanuel, and getting ourselves going, putting together a schedule, all that stuff. Putting together kind of an outreach plan to make sure we had some tools for talking to you all and also folks out in the broader community. And then the second part, which is kind of where we are now, or the tail end of that, is doing what we call a code audit. So basically reviewing your development code. per these objectives that I've been talking about and starting to identify what are some parts of your code that we think could be updated to achieve some of these things. So I'm gonna, before, when I finish up here, I'm gonna hand out a memo that's sort of our review of the development code. I will say it's kind of technical and wonky. Sorry, EQ, because she did a lot of work on it, but it's just the way we are as planners. So anyway, but I'll pass that out, and I guess we're not looking for comments on that today. But if you read that and you think, oh, I don't know about this, I'm not sure about that, let Fred know, and you can pass those comments on to us. That's kind of phase 2 is this code audit. And then the third part is to actually start to identify specific changes to your development code to implement these goals and objectives. Then we go through a process of reviewing that with all of you, getting feedback from other folks in the community. Do these things make sense? Do they speak to independence? They compatible with independence? Get review of that, and then finalize the code, the updates to your development code, and then go through an adoption process with planning commission and council. So those are sort of the 5 steps in the process. These other 2 boards just kind of talk about different types of housing, a lot of which are the things that you focused on when you were out walking around today. So things like duplexes or triplexes or quadplexes, sometimes, smaller apartment buildings. Like I hesitate always to say this, but I do live in Portland, so don't hold it against me. But my neighborhood is also like full of all kinds of different housing. There's a lot of like older, sort of small courtyard apartments, single story or at most second story, around some kind of courtyard, and you kind of don't even notice that when you're walking around, frankly, unless you're looking for them. Just like I think some of the stuff in the South. So I'm not suggesting that that's something that you should do here. I'm just sort of pointing it out. It's another type of housing. Accessory dwelling units, again, maybe you've got enough space on a lot for a duplex and an accessory dwelling unit. I don't know, that's something to sort of think about. So just kind of looking at different options, or as Fred said, do you want to look at being able to build something on a smaller lot, smaller than 5,000 square foot, being able to divide a 9,500 square foot lot or an 8,500 square foot lot into something smaller to allow for the kind of situation that Fred talked about. So that's kind of what we've got here and what we'll be looking at. And then just a few on that last board. We just have a few observations from the initial code audit about things you could think about doing. So I will block these boards, sorry about that, so I can remember what it says. Talked about this already, kind of keeping standards consistent with how do we come up with standards that ensure some consistency between existing and new housing. So that's one thing. Talked about allowing housing on different size lots. One thing you might want to think about is allowing townhomes that are the entrance or the front facade of them is closer to the neighborhood or to the street, excuse me, especially if you allow for parking in the back. So, the parking's not kind of between the house and the sidewalk, but it's actually around back, and that allows the house to be a little closer to the street and not to have that car in between. So that's something to think about. And then sort of along those lines too are there some strategies to allow, again, a lot to be divided so the back half is developed and you have access off either the side street or an alley, because you do have alleys sort of throughout the city. And I think one of the questions there is, if you want to do something like that, you want to require some improvements to the alley. So it's not just a gravel alley, and so you make sure it's sort of wide enough for cars to get through there and have enough room to park into a garage or a rear parking space. So those are a few kind of initial thoughts. Oh, one last one at the bottom of this is kind of thinking about, somebody mentioned one of the things that can be helpful in terms of compatibility or fitting into the neighborhood is having certain architectural details. And so that is something you could kind of think about, is requiring using kind of a menu-based approach to say each house needs to have at least 2 or 3 things off this list. Could be, here's 3 things you need to have, and here's a list of other things you could have, and you need to pick a couple things. So that's kind of a lot of cities have been doing that, where they've been implementing new development code requirements that allow for triplexes or quadplexes as a way to, again, kind of help with that compatibility issue, so. That's all I'm gonna say. I don't wanna stand up here and talk at you for too long. But I wanted to give you a sense of the project and then just see if you have any thoughts, questions and comments. It was great to hear the debrief from your walking tour out there, because that alone was kind of worth coming and taking notes on, so thank you for that, but also just stop, I'll sit down and I'll see what y'all are saying.
That's why we're looking at infill is to feed more affordable housing. We can tell people what they can build, but we can't tell people how they can use it, and my concern is that a lot of people, we have a crappy economy right now. Wanna build short-term rentals, that takes property off the market for people who want affordable housing long-term. How do we do that? How do we make sure that we're doing this responsibly and that we're not taking property off the market in this effort?
I'm happy to take a shot at any and all questions and then turn it over to these guys.
Go ahead, you go first.
And I, I don't recall what, if any, kind of regulations you have in place around short-term rentals. The way I would say most communities in Oregon that have some kind of regulation around short-term rentals, they essentially require permits for short-term rentals. And so they treat short-term rentals more as essentially like a business than a home, right? And so they require you to get a permit, you have to pay for that. Some places, so for instance, some places will limit the number of days per year that somebody can rent out their short-term rental. And that kind of frankly reduces the financial enticement to build a short-term rental. If you can only rent it 30 days of the year, then it doesn't look quite as good for, I'm just gonna build this thing, it is gonna take it off the market. So another is to require that the owner live in the primary house and another is just to say, well, here's another one, and that's to allow for reductions or waivers. Again, I should know some of this. I don't know if you do this for ADUs. You guys apply SDCs to your ADUs?
We do, but it's reduced.
Okay. So some places where they allow for a reduced fee for the ADUs, they also require that not be a short-term rental. So you've got to sign an agreement that says for the next 10 years, I would not use this.
What I've seen is people's parents are passing away, remodeling the house, and they're making it a short-term rental. And that takes the property off the market for somebody who's maybe looking to move up from a duplex into a, into a single family home. I don't wanna keep people from earning a living.
Right.
I mean, it's certainly not fair to do that, but I just worry, and I don't know how many we have. We have a handful. Yeah. That's just my concern.
Yeah.
And that's been a concern ever since we started talking about ADUs. So I don't know that there's been an uptick suddenly.
Yeah. So there's a wide range of things that other communities around the state do to try to at least limit the preponderance or percentage of short-term rentals. And I would be happy to, we've actually in the last couple of years, we've used a pretty thorough report on kind of what those different tools and processes are. I would be happy to provide that to you all if you're interested in it. There's also communities in other states that take an even kind of, I'll say, more significant approach, especially places where it's a really significant problem. So some of the mountain towns of Colorado, for instance, Hood River basically phased them out, no more. Can be built there. And everybody that's got one has to eventually stop using it as a short-term rental. So there's been some pretty significant things. Some of those, one of the approaches in a couple of those Colorado towns was to say, limit the number of permits that are allowed. So you have to get a license or a permit, and you cannot have more than one within a block or things of that nature. So within a certain radius, you can only have one. So they're really just trying to not let it become this really pervasive use. So there's a lot of different things you could do as a community. Those are appeals. But yeah, I'd be happy to send that report out. So
I would say that all of those require enforcement.
that is true.
Only for what?
All of those require enforcement mechanisms that we would have to think about.
Yeah.
From a community that doesn't have parking enforcement, so just saying, something to think about there.
I mean, I heard it has a lot of timelines.
Oh,
But you're not wrong, I mean, it requires you to monitor it, it's not usually that hard to find who's doing it, because you can find
because
it.
they market it.
Yeah, they market it, they need to, right, so.
Uh,
But yeah, you're right.
My question was, my understanding of some of the laws that have changed at the state level is kind of limiting what our codes can do to. Make housing more uniform, I guess we'd say. So I'm intrigued in your menu approach. But what's to prevent builders to say, well, I don't wanna do that stuff because it's costly for me. And then tying Fred up with all sorts of challenges that cost us money, and time, right? So how do we, I guess my question to you is, how do we do it in a way that's protecting our feel for the neighborhoods from our perspective, that doesn't get caught in this back and forth with the home builder who's like, well, all of these things are gonna cost me money that I don't wanna pay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll say a couple of things, again, please chime in, anybody, on this, but. One, I think that, at this point, most developers are used to seeing those kind of requirements, especially the things that sort of say you cannot have every house in a row look like the other house. You need to apply some different features to those houses. That is a pretty standard thing that developers face throughout the state and in other places. So it's not, I don't think, an unreasonable thing in terms of the cost. Yeah, you will hear that to a degree, but if it's more about like, you do wanna think about like, am I requiring something that is really costly or that's less costly? Because some of the things that you might require included on a menu might not be really all that costly. And maybe what you wanna do is, again, if you've got a menu, maybe pick 3 things that are kind of the lowest cost. So everybody's gotta do that. Then you gotta pick a couple things that might cost a little more, but they're not gonna add, more than 5% onto the cost of building the house or something like that. So I think you wanna think carefully about, what are the features that you're gonna require and or include on a menu. So I would say that, and again, I would also say that in large part, developers are getting pretty used to seeing some of those requirements. But certain things are more costly, certain types of architectural features, certain are more, building a dorm, that's gonna be more costly, right? Breaking the roof lane and all that stuff, so, they're not gonna choose the most passive thing, that is the thing you're gonna see, it's like, you got a menu, they're probably most often gonna choose the things on it that aren't as passive.
I think, and then I'll just add that in terms of the state's rules and requirements that they've been passing the last few years, that's, part of why we're working with these guys is, they're gonna essentially say, no, you can't do that, but here is the way you can sort of get to what you want to get to. Because there's some specific things the state has said we're not allowed to do anymore. And so then that's part of why we're going through this exercise, is to see like, okay, well, how do we allow these things in a way that still reaches our goals in terms of what the neighborhoods should look and feel like.
Yeah, and you're still of a size or in the size range where you don't have as many requirements on you from the state as a larger community that's over 25,000 within the Portland metro area have. So you still have a little more flexibility to allow for some of the same types of things that are now required in cities over 25,000 population, but you have a little more flexibility in how you allow for those. There are still some things you are gonna have to adhere to, and as Sean said, we will do our best to, we'll try to keep you out of trouble. That's part of our job, is like to help you do what you want and need to do, but also kind of keep you out of trouble. We'll generally tell you if somebody might have like a great idea, but we're like, yeah, but you're maybe getting in trouble for that one, so maybe find a different solution. Yeah.
I like how Fred did amazing work with the historic commission and our codes with the historic commission. And so I appreciate this moving on to the rest of our neighborhoods as well. For me personally though, and I've said this before, but just to reiterate, I really like green spaces with houses. I think it's really important to maintain that. So for me, I know the state's pushing us, high density, but if we can somehow learn through this process to maintain green spaces for families and for, properties, it's also important. And I am leaving just a few minutes early tonight. I don't want anybody to think I'm failing, but it's my son's birthday. be setting up limits, not because I don't think they're all really, really important.
Just not quite that important.
He's really, really gross.
Will not be offended in fact if you just stood up and walked out right now.
I might, like,
Good job.
but I'll just, I didn't want you to think that I didn't appreciate this, I will watch you finish the.
I'm
Yeah.
really glad to hear about the concept of, you'd call them short-term rentals, same as Airbnb, right? I was recently in Astoria with a friend whose son-in-law had just gotten a job in Astoria, and he had to turn down the employment because there was no place to buy. So many people had turned their homes into Airbnb, and they only lived there 3 months out of the year or something, that individual housing just to buy and live in full time was at such a premium that they just didn't exist. It wasn't even cost prohibitive, it just wasn't there.
Yeah, and I think. There's also kind of can be a difference between a second home and a short-term rental, right? A short-term rental is something that somebody owns and they are renting it sort of continuously for a short time, let's call that. And there are others where somebody's just building a second home, and that's really kind of, they're there 3 months a year, but they're not renting it out, but it's still kind of taking it off the market for a full-time residence. And that is a really significant problem, especially on the coast. You know, there's a very, very high percentage of homes on the coast, and that I'm sorry to say, is just a harder thing to regulate given kind of the way we regulate property transactions in this country. It's pretty hard to say you may not own a second home and just go there and stay in it however long you want. But I'll tell you what, like some of the percentages of second homes in communities along the coast are like even unbelievable almost to me. Like Manzanita is 72% of the second homes. So, you know, that means only 28% of those homes are occupied year round. And it has an impact on schools and facilities and other things.
They're doing it in Walmart, they have limited now, how no longer have short-term rentals in Walmart, so I mean,
Yeah.
that community is doing it, and
Yeah.
they have changed how to.
Yeah, for sure, short-term rentals is an easier thing to regulate. I'm just talking about a home that nobody's renting. There is, but it's a second, year round. And it does impact housing something.
Money, incentive tops, like there would be for us to.
Yeah. For, yes, I don't think you're gonna have this bigger problem with that, and I think. If you do have some regulations around short-term rentals, that's gonna help that. And again, there's some different things you can do. Yeah.
We have the data, I guess it would be through the assessor's office that shows primary, second home, short-term rentals. I mean, was there a somewhat easy way?
It's
look
not
at it.
hard to like to see from census data which homes are not occupied year round. That's something you find from census pretty easily. Short-term rentals, if the person's not living in the home, so it's not considered a year round. You know, that is year-round occupied home, that you would see, but if they are living there and they've got an accessory dwelling unit, they're renting that on a short-term basis, you don't necessarily see that from the census facility, as far as I know.
Yeah.
Good question.
For reference, I just pulled up Airbnb for independence, and there are 22 homes listed on Airbnb.
22.
And then they're the one platform.
Yeah, that's only the one website, it's not a perfect number, but.
But it gives
Good
us,
ballpark.
it gives us.
Good sense. Yeah.
And some of those homes are gonna be listed on site.
Yeah, true. Yeah, like, please.
Cause I know we had somebody pull those numbers, I wanna say within like the last year. They kind of went to
I don't think,
Fred.
no, I don't think it was me, I think it was probably
It was
for,
finance, I think. was-
Yeah.
Yeah, they went to like VR.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're looking for the
Which is
long-term,
another problem.
Yeah.
trying to raise money for the long-term town.
Yeah.
But there are, I think it's true that a lot of times they're gonna be listed on.
Right.
VRBO, CASA, Airbnb.
But we don't require a license for.
we don't require anything for
But we
short-term.
do
But
accept the
you do
transit
like-
lodging
right,
tax.
yes.
Right, but it seems like at least a permit, even if it doesn't have much cost attached, would help us identify where that tax should be collected from.
we have business permit requirement, right?
Business registry.
Business
Yeah.
registry.
But that's brick and mortar, that's not for home businesses, is it?
Yeah, so definitely something to think about if that's a thing, you know, where there's a concern or if you're concerned that by allowing more things like accessory dwelling units or, you know, smaller units, that you're gonna see more of that. Good thing to think about.
Since
Other-
we've
yeah.
been talking, excuse me, about ADUs, do we have any collection of rules, regulations, instructions that say what you need to provide if you're putting an ADU on your property?
We
Access and setbacks and all those things?
we do, I think, so you'll remember when we were out on walking down D Street out there. And the question was, what would we require? And I think that is the ultimate, that's one of the fundamental questions for me as part of this project. Is trying to get to a set of, okay, if somebody's putting an ADU on their house, on their lot, what are we gonna require? Are we gonna make them put in a sidewalk? Are we gonna make them improve a street or an alley or whatever?
Does there have to be off-street parking?
Well, there does not have to be off-street parking, and that's state law.
That is one of the.
If, and I mean, this is sort of getting into the, I mean, and I don't know if the project will get all the way to this, but I mean, this is something that I think about. Right now, we require an ADU to attach to a house, right? To get their water and their sewer, that's how they get the,
Okay.
through that.
Get services from.
Get services from the house. The reason that we do that, that gets them the lower SVC rate. Now, for me, it's like, what if you wanted in the future to draw a lot line down that and actually make that a standalone house, give it to your son or whatever, or whoever, right? Or sell it, right? Say you're a senior in a house, you got an ADU, you wanna sell you got a house behind, you wanna sell that thing, right? Get some money, right? All of a sudden, you would have to go in and I think you would, unless you can do it from the middle housing land division approach, you would have to separate out those services to have them each go to a main. You'd have to pay the SPC difference to do that. And so it's one of those things where it's like, is attaching to the house the right approach, or might there be a way to eliminate the middleman, you know? And so some of these questions about facility improvements, they're huge questions because they have a huge impact on the cost of a project.
I didn't realize they had to be physically connected, so I wanna ask Councilor Morton's favorite topic. What if there's a piece of property? Second Street, there's a piece of property in between two homes.
Yeah.
What if somebody wanted to buy that, and put a bunch of tiny homes on that?
I think that would be allowed by right, okay. So the question then becomes, is it all one parcel? And stay one parcel? Or are you dividing the ownership? Cause if you're dividing the ownership, I would say we probably can't get there.
So somebody would have to own all the tiny homes and rent them out to other people.
Exactly.
There's no way it would work.
Or lease the land.
Or do like a condominium,
Yeah.
which has a shared sewer coming to a building and condominiumize them.
Right, or potentially get
Oh,
there
but
to the middle housing land division, but I don't know if you could get there.
They do,
Just whether
they do.
people allow that.
But I don't think our code would allow. I think that we would allow a whole bunch of tiny homes on a lot under one ownership. I do not think that if we would allow to divide the ownership,
It's
to divide it.
right now, you probably wouldn't, unless the lot is a certain size, right? So I guess it depends on how big the lot is. And how many
Yeah.
tiny homes you have.
Yeah,
Yeah,
9,800
you don't have the
square
40
feet.
of them on there, yeah.
Now, the last time I asked you, which has been a while ago, how many ADU new builds have we had in Independence?
I don't think we've had a whole ton.
That was the same answer as before.
Yeah, the two that we saw are two of the newer ones.
but not new like in the last 2 years.
Right, it's
After the-
one of those is fairly new, the other one
Okay.
was a ADU and it got remodeled recently.
No, I know there's one on 16th, but I think it's actually, I don't know if it's in Monmouth or not, but it's on 16th across from Central High School.
I think there's probably.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I know.
Probably a lot that people just put in that we don't even.
That we don't even know,
Right,
yeah.
and permits or ask.
There's the
Just
garage.
think like I
Right.
model my garage and put an apartment on top,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Some of them maybe have been there for a long time.
yeah.
So how do we incentivize, I see a lot of duplexes. Communities, including here. I don't see a lot of fourplexes or larger ones that are really far more efficient if you're really honest about it. When we're talking about it, how do we incentivize builders to build that in a tiny town like us, where we don't have the means to incentivize financial person?
So I got an answer and then Matt can go. One, we need to allow it.
Well, there you go. Okay.
Yeah.
Besides allowing.
It's a start.
What else can we?
So. I will say, I'm not an economist, I'm not a like market analyst, I work with them a lot. And sometimes on these projects, we've got somebody on the team who is in that business, so. I can tell you some of what I have heard from them, which is simply that for duplexes are easier often to do, because especially if you can divide the lot, or if you can allow for a common ownership of the property, but individual ownership of the units, then it's just an easier path. And there's more opportunities from a market perspective for both owners and renters. So that's one thing. It's just a smaller market for triplexes and quadplexes, for instance. They're not necessarily any cheaper per unit to build than a duplex, depending on the size of them, but even if they are a little smaller, so like. The cost in terms of the size is a little less, the cost per square foot might be higher, that's often what happens. It also just depends on the land values in a given place, so I do think, Fred's right, first you gotta allow it. But you're probably not gonna see too many of them unless you do things that really are providing incentives. So, you provide some kind of reduced SDC for those units. Or you allow them to use less land per unit, than the duplex. So there's gotta be some additional things that allow the developer, one, to spend less money per unit, and two, to build something where there's a market for that thing. I mean, so I think that's sort of.
Cause I think going
That's
back
all.
to Counselor Porter's point, it's really about affordability, and I think one of the things that I notice. There's a lot of multifamily housing coming up in our region. Tons that are incentivized by government, almost zero is affordable. Right? So you have a lot of things for young professionals that are making over that cost, $2,000 to $3,000, a month, you have a lot of stuff that's 15 and up, maybe there's nothing under that, right? There's nothing that's truly affordable if we have a shared understanding of what affordability is, that I would think is affordable for people making minimum wage per se.
Yeah, if to build something that's affordable to people making somewhere below either 80% of median income or 60% of median income, those are kind of a couple of pretty standard affordability measures. Is it affordable to people in low or very low income ranges? It's almost frankly impossible to do that without some kind of subsidy.
Yeah.
Whether it's you're providing the land, or the developer is getting state funding or low income housing tax credits, or whatever it may be, and usually they're putting together like 5 different kinds of funding to make those things happen, so very, very difficult. And then, even then, if we're talking about people in, again, say 60% or below, if you're talking about people making minimum wage, they're not going to likely be able to afford to buy that home most of the time, they can't afford the down payment that's gonna get them there. So there is more often rental properties that just don't have.
I think to that point too,
So-
that's what United Way was able to do in Salem. Salem gave them the land. And then they were able to, do multiple.
Yeah.
Different streams of money,
Yes.
build those 400 square foot homes or whatever for retirees. And my concern is we talk about affordable housing a lot, and the group that we don't really talk about are the ones that are on social security, period. You know, the ones who don't get increases in their income over time, and I think that's a demographic that we tend to leave out when we're talking about affordable housing, because you're right, we talk about young professionals, we want to get them into their first house or starter home, and then, you know, eventually get them someplace else, but seniors are not looking for that. Seniors are looking for that stable rent that they can afford over time until, you know.
Well, I actually said minimum wage workers, it doesn't mean that, you know, there's a lot of seniors making minimum wage.
Yeah.
I think that's an important thing that people don't think about. I think people think minimum wage workers, and they think high school, college. And more minimum wage workers are not high school, college, they're moms,
Yeah.
their dads, they're senior citizens, and so. Yes, to what you're saying, but also. The minimum wage job in America these days is not your first job.
Right.
Experience for a lot of people, it's what they've been able to
We
get.
need to focus on fixed income, you know, but fixed
Right.
income for you or I or somebody else could look vastly different. You know, somebody who maybe has a large home in the air park might have a pension, they might have investments, they might have social security, they might have all kinds of stuff that, it's a fixed income still, they know what they're gonna get every month. But it's not the same as somebody who's living solely on social security, who can't afford that rent increase.
So again, I think
Yeah.
the only ways to see those kind of homes built is through some kind of government
Yeah,
intervention
Yeah.
or subsidy. Land donation can be super important in that regard. And there are some of those programs that are focused on home ownership or on ownership housing. And there are some organizations out there that are focused on that. Habitat for Humanity, we saw the sign. Just as we were
Yeah.
driving around earlier, that was
Yeah.
on a property and it said future habitat home. So, you know, working with and supporting groups like that is really important.
but then we get into the question of reducing the STCs, and I know that was an issue with the
Sure.
Habitat home. And we just raised our STCs a year ago, 2 years ago, you know, so it's an ugly issue right now for us.
Yeah.
You know, if we waive it for one, we have to waive it for
Sure.
everybody.
It's all about trade-offs and yeah, you don't have to live it for everybody that qualifies for wherever you set the threshold or set the requirements. Yeah, you need
We need
to
to run
do
it.
it a fair way.
I was just saying,
It's hard.
may I comment? So our SDCs are based upon our capital improvement plan, so if we reduce it for certain people, it increases it for the others. And that's something that is forgot, that people talk about, so we may reduce it for these people, but then the other developers are gonna pay more. Because we have to have the water treatment, we have to have the sewer.
Yeah, and really that's ultimately a policy choice, you know, that is something that I would say more communities are looking at is scaling their SDCs to the size of the home. And but in an overall kind of revenue neutral way, so you are in that case reducing the cost of the SDC for a smaller home. With the assumption that those folks have less money, that's why they're moving into a smaller home often. But the people with the larger home, they are gonna pay more. And you don't, the spread doesn't have to be huge, you know, you can kind of set the scale so that, you know, maybe that spread, it's not like 50% to 300% of your, you know, average SCC rate, maybe it's 78 to 136 or something. So you're not really like at least penalizing people too much for having a bigger home.
So would that almost be like a per square foot kind of an STC almost?
Yeah, there are cities that have updated their SCC methodologies to apply something like that. It's not, and it can be just purely square foot. Usually, I don't wanna say usually, we're working actually with, like Oswego's looking at doing that for the parks SPC, and so we've been looking at what do other cities do in terms of scaling their SPC. We actually have somebody, not me, on that team who is a specialist in this regard. But there, again, we're looking at kind of a range, so it's if you're between this square footage and this square footage, you're paying this percent of the average SPC, this range to this, you know, here, this percentage. The minimum range is like 63%, and the maximum of the range is like 136. So again, it's not as just purely per square foot scale, but it is based on size and it's picking some ranges.
And the people we get pushback on the SDCs are the higher end homeowners too.
Sure.
What we're looking for, and if you can find it, it'd be wonderful, is developers with deep pockets and big hearts. That's what you need.
Dying breed. Some of them out there.
Question going back to ADUs, like as we saw on our walking tour today, I like. Especially like in the historic district, how the ADUs feel like they could be more integrated in, whether it's like a carriage house that's getting remodeled. A garage addition, something off the back of the house. And I wonder if there are communities out there doing some creative things to incentivize ADUs, and some of what I see is I don't know that homeowners are always creative and thinking like, oh, this carriage house that's run down and falling down. I don't have the vision of seeing how that could even turn into an ADU. And then I think a lot of people also don't have any clue on like, what would that cost me? Is that a $40,000 thing? Is that 200,000? Or is there a range in there? And then some people I think would do it and they kind of conceptualize, like, I know I could turn that into an apartment and I could get $1,000 in rent a month or some number. But for them to get from A to B, they don't understand the process. And is there a program or is there anybody doing a program that helps walk people through that, and even maybe front end, do almost like a grant program or incentive program? We will help you build that or turn that in, and then we pay it over time, or is there anybody that's kind of looking at programs like that?
I don't know offhand of programs that are sort of quite that hands-on, let's say. I mean, I know there's I know of places where they do have at least some good explanatory information about, what the requirements are associated with an ADU. If there are incentives like reduced SDCs, what those are, what the process is to get one permitted,
Right.
etc.
Choosing, like, you can choose one of these floor plans and.
There are a couple of communities, actually, that do have kind of off the shelf floor plans or building plans for ADUs. And so if you come in with one of those, you're good to go.
Right.
You don't have to go through the whole. I mean, you still gotta get a building permit, but you don't have to go through a long review process because you've got something that's already been vetted. And so there are some communities who have done that, not as ton. Gene did that a while back. A couple other places that have done that that I'm aware of in Oregon. I think the thing you need to do on that is make sure that, like, you can't just take Eugene's plans.
Right,
You need to-
right.
You could take them as a starting point, and then you probably need to get an architect to look at them and make sure they sync up with your development standard, right? That they're consistent with your setback standard, with your height standards, with any other design standards that you might have that apply to housing. So, and that's sort of how some of those places have done it. They've like gotten some pro bono, architect work. Maybe Eugene, who knows, they might have gotten it out of U of O, I don't know. But so there are some places that have done a certain amount of that. It's not like super common around the state. And then the other thing, which you talked about, then I will stop, but is reducing or waiving SPCs for those types of buildings, which again, I know that you've kind of got this trade-off of you're not getting the money to pay for the facilities that you need. But I'm just saying, if you want to know how places have seen really a lot more ADUs, it's been through that. I mean, really reducing the cost of it.
This is not the best example, but I'm kind of thinking like the people that will come through neighborhoods and be like, oh, put solar panels on your house, and then we pay the whatever you pay back, and it's great. Solar powers are not equal to ADUs, I think
Right.
that, but something like that where you make it really easy for somebody to say, great, you kind of cover the upfront cost, I still get the benefit of it,
Yeah.
yes, I'm paying a certain percentage back in.
It seems to me council governments could be a good place to do that, that we could come to like a understanding with our neighboring communities on a set of like 4 ADU basic design, and it fast tracks the process. And the council of governments could give our planning team additional support in those processes, right? That could be the place where that is housed, and then they paint whatever community this person lives in. say, there's someone in your community who wants to, there's technical support there.
It's your cog, they will have out.
So and I'm completely remiss the fact that I miss saying this, but it was the mayor saying, you know, certain ADUs really fit within the historic neighborhood. And one of the things that I think is just, it's and I've talked to our planning commission before, it's something that I forgot to mention though, it's things in our historic district like alleys make infill particularly well suited for that portion of the community. Areas without things like alleys or things with longer blocks, it's just harder to get to the back of a lot. If you can't get to the back, it's harder to put an ADU in the back of the lot if you can't get to it, right? Or a duplex or whatever it might be to put in the back of a lot, or a second home or whatever it might be. And so things like alleys, and I mean, I look at a picture like this and, you know, I've always my first job was in a place that had a lot of cottage clusters. And so I kind of got a little jaded on cottage clusters. I just didn't think that they all worked out right in certain instances, partially because of the orientation issues and all that sort of stuff. But I look at a thing like this and I look at an alley going through one of our blocks, and the possibility of creating a whole bunch of ADUs with an alley in the center of it, I'm like, that's essentially a cottage cluster. And you could do it incrementally in the back of lots over time, you know, it's something that could be done. We just need to figure out how to potentially activate the back of the lots, you know. Right now, we don't really have things in our code to say, yeah, go for it. You know, you could do an ADU, but who knows what the improvement would be that we're gonna require of you, you know? And so trying to figure out ways to say, yes, you can.
Maybe
Back there
maybe
is,
we waive those requirements for alleys for a period of time.
yeah,
To incentivize people, but you know, the governor foisted these requirements on us and we have to kind of figure this out ourselves, how we're gonna do this. I like the idea of alleys being more used rather than just a throughway. I mean, large urban city, London has rear access to a lot of their homes and stuff, it makes a lot of sense. But,
it's how we build cities forever.
I know, it's, in our developments, I mean, Counselor Source and I both live in new developments and there's just no way to put anything on the backside without, I mean, with car access, it's not gonna work.
My neighborhood has a unique situation because there's a bunch of trailers that were leveled and there's now a lot of space that with a road behind it theoretically. So it's unique, but for the most part, yes.
But Edwards Edition in Monmouth is built like that for rear access.
It's-
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that was an aesthetic thing, I think, just to not have cars out front. So we go to the governor and we say we want an access alley program, and we want funding for it. So we don't have to wait for SDCs. Thank you.
Yeah.
There's no simple solution.
Okay, I think that's probably a good place to leave it. I think this was a good conversation. I know that you folks have other stuff on the agenda. If you have thoughts coming out of this that you would like to share with the consultants, please go ahead and send them to me and I can get them to them. Also, they have their report here and we can pass this around both ways. If you see anything that just looks egregious or not right, or that you particularly liked, go ahead and send that to me as well. So
Happy to take criticism, compliment.
yes, and I will say to everyone here, including the planning commission, thank you so much for going on that walk. And going out and exploring the community, that is, it's fun. But it's also a good chance to learn about the community and we really appreciate it.
Thanks for letting us trolley part of the way.
Oh, I know.
And I am very disappointed we missed it, but at least we got a chance to drive around your community. a little more, so that was good.
Brad, what's our minimum square footage for a dwelling? Is it like 1,000 square feet?
1,000 square feet.
Okay, does that
For an
also
ADU, you
apply?
can go less, you can go less, was it
Okay.
1,000 square feet for a primary dwelling?
What's the minimum for a ADU?
I don't think that we have a minimum for the ADU, but a maximum is 800 square.
Or maximum?
Oh.
Thank you all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Good to see you. Sam.
Thank you.
And doesn't the primary have to be larger than the ADU?
Yes.
And I asked, I'm 870 square feet a house. So,
For example.
Or could you create, how would that, you built a new primary and turn that into.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Make her
can
house
have-
be-
Oh,
yeah.
70 is more than.
We would track, we would.
don't like a lot of
look into
my.
figures and track that.
Yeah, no, I mean, the front's just the front yard, but
Yeah.
yeah, behind it. Cause it's 8,300
Airbnb in
square
your back
foot lot.
All right, well, you guys can feel free to take off, I think I might be taking off. I don't know.
That is abstain.
Wow.
And did you guys have stuff that you wanted to share? I should have asked you guys more. Did you guys have stuff that you wanted to share? Anything else?
No, just appreciate the walk.
Yeah.
I've lived in my house since 1982. I learned all sorts of stuff today.
Cool. That's awesome.
Fred, the phrase developer gets thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
But if we're building, if we're doing infills, isn't that almost gonna be like a mom and pop situation, or a carpenter's gonna build one house? A developer tends to.
You're,
Be surprised.
yeah, well, you could be, so it's a great question. And that's another thing, and it's part of the reason why we're talking about this different than greenfield development, because it's just a fundamentally different beast. It's a different type of person doing it. So like a lot of times we'll see people like Kiros in town go into a lot and he'll get a lot and he'll turn it into a duplex. So you get some folks like that, but you'll also get folks who wanna put an ADU in the back. It's one of those ones that we saw is relatively recent. That was a guy who moved to town. He comes here every now and again. He said, you know what, my daughter's gonna move into the front, I'm gonna move into that back ADU. And he built the ADU, he had a contractor built the ADU, but it was him that did the project. So it is a different type of animal, just fundamentally, this infill development.
Thank you guys.
We'll have to send separated every time.
You would move.
There is flagging there, so be careful, you're
Just
gonna have to
don't-
be careful.
Yeah, just go around Myra.
It's just.
We're
feels a little
moving
weird.
Counselor Source,
Yeah.
because he's way over there by himself. So he's gonna go around
No,
you.
very nice.
Yeah.
It's not gonna trip over the cord.
I will not trip on the club.
She's very safely noted,
Oh, I know, I love the orange flag on it.
Yeah.
right? Right, they're keeping you all safe.
So it's all right, I'll just jump right
Yes.
into my thing. So you all remember, a couple months ago, I think it was May, maybe April. I came to a work session and talked to you all about MRRA, the Moderate Income Revolving Loan Fund. This was a program that the state created, the legislature created, and it opened up back in February. The goal of it is to try to support or incentivize, I'd say lowercase a affordable housing, this housing that's accessible to people earning 120% of area median income or less. In the reason that I brought it to y'all was it will support both rental and ownership. And the ownership piece was what we thought was particularly interesting, just because there's just not a lot of programs out there that support affordable ownership. So as you recall, this is let me back up and part of why I'm bringing this back, so I brought it to you all before, kind of described it, felt like I got kind of a tepid response from you all about whether or not we should be pursuing this. And so I kind of backburnered it, and then the state actually reached out and had a meeting with several folks from the fairly high level folks from the state, essentially saying, hey, in September, the rules are gonna change, we think the big cities are gonna essentially suck up all the money in this program, so we would like small communities like yours to be able to access it, you've expressed an interest. Essentially, they said, what do we have to do to help you guys do this program? And so I said, well, I don't know, I have lots of questions, and they answered as many of them as they could. They said, okay, I'll come back to council and see if there's interest in pursuing this. So here I am. You know, you'll recall this is kind of like an urban renewal program where the city would get a loan from the state, and then turn it around and give it to the developer as a grant. The developer would use that grant and build their development, whatever that development is. And then the owners of that development would pay a fee in lieu of taxes, which would go back to the state repaying the loan. So that's essentially how this would work. It's a fairly complicated program, as you can imagine, because the county has to be involved, the tax assessor has to be involved. So the process would be, council would pass a resolution to create the program. We would obviously have a lot of staff background work to do with that. The state would then have to work with the county to create an intergovernmental agreement, sort of creating the framework that allows this program to work, the fee in lieu of taxes. And then once that's done, the program exists, and we would work with any developers that were interested. They would have to supply a pro forma saying, here's why I need the money, here's how it all works out, here's where the Merle grant makes this all pencil out for me. Council would have to pass a resolution approving the loan application to the state. Then, state reviews everything, money comes back to the city, which then goes to the developer, and then the process happens.
So council will have oversight of every
Application,
every
yes.
application.
Yes, now, the catch to all of this is, affordability has to be maintained for 10 years. And on a rental product, that seems fairly straightforward. You partner with some type of affordable housing provider who can do the income checks and everything. For a ownership product, that seems a little more challenging, because you can obviously make the initial offering priced correctly and income qualify the buyers. But what happens 4 years later when they go to sell? The short answer to that is, you can create a deed restriction that goes with the property. I've gotten a couple of examples. It's fairly complex because you not only have to make it available, you have to not only it has to sell to somebody who income qualifies, but the pricing also. So say the market goes up really well and houses are worth twice what they were 4 years ago. The house has to be offered at a price that is affordable to somebody earning 120% of whatever that current income, area median income is. And then the city's on the hook for actually ensuring that happens.
So there's potential lost equity for the original owner when they go to sell.
Correct. But then again, they're also, they should know going in, they're buying a product that is limited, which is part of why they're able to buy it.
Right.
And how long does it take them to pay back the loan that they've gotten?
So the loan is structured so that it should be a 10-year time frame. So essentially, the amount that we can get from the state to pass on to the developer is actually calculated based on what the number of units the developer is building, the projected tax fee in lieu of taxes that development would pay. Obviously, reduce a little bit for contingency and all that kind of a thing, but there's essentially a calculation that would be made from the development to say, okay, this development could only fund $300,000 loan grant, or a 500,000, or whatever the case may be.
And what taxes are being waived?
Yeah, there we go.
So all of them.
So that means if we give this loan out, all we've done is pass through the money. we don't get any taxes on that property for 10 years.
Correct.
Correct.
The fire department gets made whole. The county would collect a fee in lieu of taxes, so they would essentially project what taxes would be for that property. They would collect that amount of money, but as a fee in lieu, they would hand back whatever the percentage would be to the fire department for any operating
But nothing
levies,
to the
bonds,
city.
et cetera, from the fire department. City gets nothing. And also, and this is different from urban renewal districts. In urban renewal, bonds and levies, they're not captured by urban renewal districts. In this case, they would be captured. So by the fee in lieu. So essentially, the city and all other taxing districts get nothing for 10 years from this development.
And yet we'll be providing service, and we will be providing parks and police.
So, and my concern is what kind of staffing is this process gonna take?
That's what Sean and I have been talking
And
about.
that's, I mean, that is the big concern, is there's a lot of work in setting it up. And then also in the application process, there's a very thorough pro forma that has to go and working with the developer. And then, you know, in terms of ensuring affordability, it's kind of one of those like, I mean, as long as nothing happens, as long as nothing sells, it's really not too much work. But then, yeah, how do you know that somebody is going to sell the property, and then how do you ensure that it's going, you know?
It almost seems like there would be other ways to ensure affordability. Beyond a lose money proposition.
Well, in rentals it's
How are
easy,
you
but in
promoting this to the
homeownership.
city? Is it up to like, other than like, hey, this is a way for you to get affordable housing for your community, but. You get no taxes, you get no anything, cause.
Yeah, and that's,
Their programs with my.
yeah, and that, honestly, that was my feedback to them was. You know, if this could be more like a true urban renewal district where, say, you need to build a lift station. And that lift station is gonna serve a wider range of developments than just the one we're talking about. You know, okay, maybe the developer can finance that lift station with the first phase of their development. Lift station gets built, and then they can, and then that it's, you know, creates the opportunity for additional housing that couldn't go, you know, other housing, market rate housing that couldn't otherwise go in, it pays taxes, et cetera. But
What's the county stance?
I
I mean, they're the ones that have to enter into this IGA and.
they're concerned about the level of complexity. They're willing to work with us on it. You know, they're willing to work with us on it, but they're concerned about the level of complexity.
It seems.
I would much rather.
Seems to me that the best way to do this is to partner with a third party. Like a Polk CDC. And they do all the compliance checks, and that's a rent to own program. And the rent to own is 10 years. So the idea is you commit to staying in this housing and you follow the compliance checks from this third party. And then in 10 years, there's a deal where you, hopefully, there's some other resources we can connect with these families. Where there's a lump sum at the end that they can make a payment. And that's some of the revenue that we can work with CDC to collect. And that seems like the way that would pencil out. And this is the perfect example of how the state thinks that they're gonna solve housing. Is it's not the cities don't have revenue problems, it's just getting people into housing, that's all they care about.
Yeah.
They don't actually care about solving city revenue challenges. But I think if we connect it to with the Polk CDC, see if they're interested in helping with this. Or entities like that, it could be an attractive pilot program for. But it would have to be, I mean, you're talking about a really specific population. There'd be people who are very established in this community, who have family, work, et cetera, that could meet those requirements of, yes, I'll stay for 10 years. Because without that, it doesn't really pencil out for us or them.
To that point, the main reason why I wanted to bring this back was, you know, the Habitat for Humanity project. You know, they're obviously running into some issues with the SDCs and things like that. A use for this money can be to pay SDCs. So that's, that was really kind of my own, you know, if we didn't have a sort of an opportunity of some type, I would have just said, you know what, it doesn't make sense to pursue this right now. You know, with the Polk Cities or with the Habitat one, you know, I've been sort of trying to do the math basically. It's okay, if we're saying $3,000 in taxes every year for the houses, you know, there's 10 houses, 10 years, talking $300,000. I mean, that's a decent chunk of money. It's probably not gonna cover the entirety of what they need, but it gets partway there. You know, but then it's kind of a, well, but is the juice worth the squeeze? You know, it's a lot of work.
The other thing that I would suggest, because I hear they really want small communities, because they don't want the feedback to legislators being like, oh, you passed this thing that only helped the poor.
Yeah.
In Eugene.
Yeah.
So what we need is technical assistance. We need them to support our staff in doing this compliance, and we need them to support our staff in doing the work with the potential developer. And if that can come with, we can work with an entity to make that happen. And then they get to say, yeah, small communities use this program too. Then the technical assistance would probably be stuff that they probably already be doing anyway, right? So I would suggest that could be something that could be beneficial for us too.
Then you get back to what you were saying, City Manager West, is providing services with no income, no revenue to support it, and we have to look at the community, we have to respond to their questions and say, you know, yeah, we know we're in a revenue shortfall. That's why we're closing the museum, that's why we're doing this, that, and the other thing. And then suddenly we allow all these, and I don't know that it would be all these, but if we're looking at Habitat Humanity, that's one project. Do we want to implement this program for one project? It just seems like the staffing part of it would be insurmountable if it took off.
Or even figuring out the first
Yeah,
one. I
Yeah.
mean, it just seems like. My concern would be just that, like, we don't know how much staff time it would take, and
Yeah.
and I do like the idea of like. Could there be a third party like Polk CDC or Habitat for Humanity that we basically say. We'll be the conduit for this, but you are on the hook for all the reporting and monitoring of it, we just don't have to.
but again, we're not getting the taxes.
I know, and that's the
Yeah,
thing.
that's
that-
really hard.
I think we gotta be really careful, because I think the public sees those as two separate issues, even though they're not. But if we're the council that doesn't work the best to our ability to address housing issues.
I think it's an honorable program, I think.
And I think from my perspective. I mean, how many houses is this really gonna be? So the gap,
That's the unknown, we
Yeah.
don't know, what if it takes off like, you know, wildfires?
well, we can limit it, we can choose to limit it.
Well, and it's not
And it's 10 years.
infinite amount of money coming
Sure.
from state.
This is gonna be like only a couple of years, like they're not gonna have to do this.
Yeah.
So, I think I think the risk is worth it, because,
If we can get a third party.
well,
Do all the
or technical assistance, you
Yeah.
could say, because I think.
Yeah.
The 10-year moratorium is tough, but after the 10 years, they come online. And we're working to address some housing issues in our community. And I just worry. The public doesn't see. If the council says no to this opportunity, the public sees it as, well, are they really serious about addressing housing
Well,
issues?
because we've been talking about, we wanna help people get into homes.
Right,
So in terms of technical assistance, you know, cause I mean, that was. You know, they asked, you know, what do you need from us to make this happen? And I was like, I need you to tell me how to handle this monitoring situation. They need you to help me get all this
I need
figured
you
out.
to, give me staff. Yeah, state staff is fine.
Yeah, and you know, and they pointed me to a couple of folks that have examples of these deed restrictions, but they also were pretty clear, like, you know. It's up to you all to figure out how you are what makes you comfortable with the monitoring, you know, that's. And I understand their side of it is they don't wanna say, well, here's the way to do it, because we might have a better way, we might do it, you know, have a different idea. And so I think, you know, the assistance they're gonna provide is, it's a pretty high level.
We're not gonna get extra staff, is what
Yeah.
you said.
It feels like this would be like a pilot project. And I guess my concern is, right, there's. We say yes, we do this for a year, let's say we get a few projects that are going, and then they're like, you know what? This wasn't worth it, and so we're not gonna continue the program, but you're still on the hook for the next 9 years to.
Yes, that's exactly the way it would be.
Yeah, and then. So then I feel like they kind of like, well, we tried that and we've moved on. Like, we're doing other stuff now and we're kind of left with this 10-year commitment.
I agree that we need to look at every option available, and I like the fact that we can control the flow of this and the number. I would also like to see us consider something that our consultant was saying, is talk about adjusting SDC so that it's based on essentially square footage. And that might yield some savings too for the customer. But I think we probably are going to end up having a bouquet of different options that help people out.
So,
No, I was just gonna say, the other thing, you know, this is just kind of a wild idea, is, you know.
Gonna cost me.
Maybe not too much, but you know, I mentioned this is kind of like an urban renewal district, and so. You know, that would be the other way to look at this, is say, well, what if we said, okay, well, we could, an urban renewal district be a heck of a lot easier than what they are talking about doing. I mean, there's other issues with urban renewal districts, I don't wanna say that would be an easy solution, but. If this is the kind of thing that's of interest, you know, things, like I say, things like building lift stations and infrastructure that would allow a developer to be able to offer their product more affordably. I mean, that's something that an urban renewal district can be. It still has issues as far as you're diverting tax revenue. It, you know, but it comes with a lot less moving parts, I think.
And you have to get the funding into the urban renewal district in order to fill the
Yeah,
position.
yeah.
And getting that funding, we don't have it in general fund, so where are we gonna take it?
I like Mayor Kate's idea of it being a pilot project and we assess it after a year. It's not worth it.
It's-
But we're
it's a
still,
lot of work
but
for
we're still on.
Yeah.
For 9
9
years,
Yeah.
so just be.
But if it's
Based on quantity.
Yeah,
So I think, here's another potential example. So we have Polk County Family Services here now. Could probably identify some families who could benefit from this program. And we create a program where it's like a wraparound services, so it's just one of the things that they get connected to. There's training, there's compliance checks that the county's already required to do with these families for things like SNAP. Other assistance that they might be receiving, and that's another partnership where this makes sense to me, right? We can't, like. I think that our concern is like, we can't do this alone. And it doesn't feel like it's designed to be something that people do alone. Maybe the big cities have the ability to do that. But like, there's enough partners in our community where we can identify an entity who's already doing these kind of checks. That's just, here's another source of funding to stabilize these families. And maybe it's a little different than how other communities are doing it, but we could effectively, I feel like we could effectively.
I think we're generally supportive, but could you have a meeting with Polk County CDC and Polk County Resource Center? See what their thoughts are?
Yeah, I can, if, so, and this kind of gets back to the ownership question, you know, cause. Rental will be one thing, the issue with Polk CDC is if they're the owner, they're a nonprofit, it's not gonna pay taxes, and then the whole thing blows up. I think it's gonna be hard to sort of limit people to say you have to live here for 10 years.
Sure.
You know, it's just, you know, cause I mean, I've kind of talked with Habitat in the past about that kind of thing, and you know, cause. I mean, their model works because they income qualify people, they provide the supports, but then it's your house, you know, you're living there, you're taking care of it, if you get a job somewhere else and you need to move, you're gonna sell it.
But the answer is the deed restriction, because. It's probably gonna be pretty hard to sell a house with a deed restriction to say it has to qualify, the people who are living in here have to qualify in its parameters. So the deed restriction automatically. Kind of pushes people into doing it, right?
Then I guess it's also the, you know. I mean, the Habitat project is 10
Yeah.
townhomes, you know, and the work involved in setting all this up, you know, so to the point of like, if we could do this as a pilot project, I would love to do it as a pilot project, but it's a lot of work to just do a 10-unit pilot project.
Right.
You know, and then of course, the other issue is we say we get the pilot project going, there's no guarantees anybody else is gonna come along in the backside to want more.
So this funding sounds like it opens up, or the rules change in like September, so we've gotta make a decision before.
Fairly quickly.
Fairly quickly.
Yeah, and it's, you know, and it is, there's a pot of money that is there essentially until it gets used.
Sure.
And then the legislature presumably, if it's popular, might refill the pot. Eventually the money is gonna get paid back into the pot and can't get loaned out again. That's the idea.
But even if we did something, so let's say we're like, yeah, let's give it a go, do we even have any projects that would be lined up and ready to go enough that, let's say in a year, it would be foreseeable for us to even make that commitment?
Yeah, I mean, the Habitat project would be the most likely. Anything else, especially on the ownership side,
Yeah,
probably
it
not.
just doesn't feel like there's a lot,
And I'm gonna return to the operations side again.
yeah.
I only have one shot,
Uh-huh.
right? And I don't know how many projects do I have you on? So if we add another one, I have to take them off of them. I don't have two shots.
Yes.
I have one threat.
And we made the argument that budget cycle, we don't have enough stuff to do, it's done. And we need revenue, so as much as I love the idea, I truly love the idea of doing this, I just don't know if we could do it.
Well, and I think it's also, you know, I would be advocating, this money, again, juice worth the squeeze, you know,
Right.
the amount of benefit for the amount of work involved. If I'm kind of on the fence with it myself, you know, as you can probably tell. You know, if I really felt like, yes, this is a serious benefit, we can do a lot of good with this, then doesn't matter what else I'm doing, I'm gonna
Right.
suggest we do this.
Or if we had like 10 projects kind of in the works that were like, oh, it seems like we would be able to, you know, there's multiple good fits for this funding source, but doesn't feel like we do right now. And I frankly, we don't find that things are moving forward, but I don't think things are screaming forward.
I agree. Do we have any developers that know about this program yet?
We do, there is a private developer looking at a property in town that we discussed this with, they were interested in it, although kind of cautious, you know, the 10-year affordability requirement.
Right. I'd sure be more interested in doing a very small subdivision, not a 60 or a 90
Yeah,
home thing, because that's a lot of service for us to provide with.
well, and to your point, you know, these folks, they still need to even annex the property into the city, so just timing wise, it just doesn't work out.
And this,
I'm supportive, I'm really supportive of trying to see if Habitat would be interested in doing this. There's a few other factors that I'm a little worried about, uncertainty with the economy could lead to downturn development, or we're stuck holding the bag with no new development, period. And this could be something that we have. I'm worried about the optics of us saying over and over again, we need some state support to do middle housing and affordable housing, and then we're deciding not to take the thing.
It has to be a program that works for us.
Yeah, I think we.
I-
It has to be an impactful program.
I understand that. I understand. So I think if we say no, then I think we need to clearly communicate to our legislative delegation what's wrong with these policies. And I think we also have a governor's office right now who's reaching out, being like, please take these dollars. So I think it could be a potential example that they could highlight if it works, right? And it is a risk, of course, but
It could be an example they can highlight if it's not right for the community too. You know, if you go
Yeah.
back to the legislative community, you say, it's nice you're offering us this money, but we can't implement it. As much as we would like to, we can't possibly implement it. So how does that help us? You know,
And I
it
worry
means
that-
we've gotta get further in the hole on revenue And further in the hole on staff time, it's.
This is a legislature who's saying, well, the problem is that the cities are charging too many STCs. So they're not gonna be very sympathetic to that message unless we actually try. And it doesn't work, and we've done everything right, you know what I mean?
Well, he's gonna pause when Sean's not excited, when he's not a
Yeah, yeah.
you know, I mean, he's
Absolutely.
got to do work.
Absolutely.
And what I worry about is they highlight this project, they're like, look at this wonderful project that built 10 units of housing, and it's like. You're putting us then in a bad spot of being like, it worked for you, it doesn't work for us, and now we're having to kind of publicly be the one saying. Yes, they're using this as an example of 10 housing units got built in a partnership with Habitat, we're the ones looking. Crappy, saying, you know what, actually, red flag, this didn't work for us, and here's all the reasons it didn't. And we have to think about that, so I mean, I understand this. The complexities with the state and they want communities, and we want rural communities to do this, but I also feel like rural communities get stuck with. These ideas that don't pencil out, and they know they don't.
Cause these ideas are designed for urban environments.
For state. So I agree that. Having a fix to the affordable housing in our community is. Really important, whether that's big A, little a. But I think it just has to be right for our community, and that's my concern is, yes, they're operating this money. I also really feel like the state is. Focused clearly on numbers and housing units, and they're not really thinking through them.
Right. I think it's worth cautiously exploring, but I like the idea of the technical assistance to go along with it. Because there's only so much capacity we have staff wise. And if this only works for 1 or 2 or 3 situations, maybe that's as deep as we wanna go. There are a lot of other things that need to be fixed at other levels besides just the cities.
And it could be telling feedback, right, if the county is like, we'll do it. For kind of the same reasons that we're doing it, well, the state's operating this and we should. Try to be good partners, but nobody's like, you know what, there's the potential in this could be really cool. I would even imagine that like cities of Portland and Eugene are even like, I'm not sure this is.
I had a conversation with the housing person in Corvallis.
Yeah.
She had heard that we were looking at it and had gotten the same call
Yeah.
from the state saying, hey, we heard you're interested, what do we have to do? And it was just kind of fascinating because they were interested from the rental side, they weren't looking at the ownership side. But many of the same, just a lot of unknowns in terms of, well, what about this and what about that? And it's like, well, you have to decide and hopefully it'll work out,
Right.
And I'll say, this is one opportunity. Sean and I are constantly looking for other opportunities, other ways. There was a unique thing when I was in Bend and I did a tour where it was for childcare. It's not necessarily housing, but they had a deal with a developer who was doing multifamily, that 1 house or 2 were purpose built for in-home childcare. And it was a reduced purchase price, rental price for those units. So there's a lot of things out there, be it childcare, be it housing, that we're looking at. So this is one opportunity. We'll bring them all to you that we find. But this is just one. There could be more.
Yeah.
And maybe they're getting feedback from other small cities, but they should definitely get feedback from us as to what we think the issues are and the impediments could be for us.
Yeah, and for what, and to their credit, they reached out, looking for that feedback. It was the governor's office, several of the regional solutions folks. And yeah, specifically saying, hey, you have questions, let's, lay them on us, tell us what the issues are. And I've since sent them a few additional emails saying, hey, what about this? And I'm worried about that. It's.
Well, best case scenario, they hear enough, but we're concerned about this or that.
Right.
Or the third thing, and they say, maybe we take another look at this program.
Yeah.
That's great.
But unless we provide that feedback, we can't just assume that other communities have
Right.
sent that back
We've
to
been vocal.
our legislature.
Is there a way to do a joint, so like a shared agreement with Monmouth? Where in their jurisdiction, they would be the approval, but we can full resources into working on the paperwork?
I will look at it, my initial thought is probably not, because it has to, like, they talk about an entity of local government. So unless we created, I mean, maybe we could come up with an intergovernmental agreement and.
That's another part there. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I'd rather, in that case, I'd rather see Polk County take the
Yeah.
lead, because we're certainly not the only small community that could, at the consumer's end, benefit from
All
this.
city certainly gonna.
So what I'm hearing is give them feedback. We're not looking at this strongly, but if they hear our feedback and they consider changing it, bring this back to you.
Yeah.
Yes, yes,
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
good summation.
I'm happy to talk to Polk County again as well, and just kind of say, cause it was, I think, April that I asked them about it, and so I'm happy.
I wonder how many other communities have contacted them since then.
Yeah.
One other thing, Councilor Morton brought it up, scalable SDCs. Is there interest in yes, okay, it's not gonna be quick, right, but if there's an interest, we'll start with.
Because the advantage I see there is if a builder says, well, I'll build a couple of 1,200 foot or 1,000 foot or 900 square foot homes. That would serve as a potential entry level home for a younger family.
Or the downsides,
Or the downside.
because that's the other problem. is
Yes. Yeah.
People who don't wanna be living in big homes anymore can't find this.
So we will start taking a look at that, and as we move forward, we'll bring it back.
Thank you, I really appreciate the robust discussion about this, it was super helpful.
Should ask us what we think.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, agreed.
Yes,
everyone else. They work for every city.
Well,
some Sean and I were talking, and it's just like.
Together, and it's relevant to this.
Because our
Jen
general
talks to him
I
on
know.
almost a daily basis.
We tried hard.
Because I remember the first housing bill
I will give them
that they did, you slipped in front of, they started out small. Small.
Yeah.
you know, a small description, and then they had to sort
At
of.
state level, sort of, we're trying to qualify as a program,
Every
they would
consultant's
have
important.
technical assistance for
You know, they have
kids
that
under
website.
10,000.
That's where they start.
And that would be this,
Hold on, so-
right, like that would be.
Are we officially adjourned?
I would say we,
Richard.
I think we're adjourned, Myra, you can turn us off.
Oh,
We're officially
move to
adjourned.
adjourn.
Move to adjourn. Second. I can't second.
Uh,
Aye, all of us,
All of us.
we're done.